lived out of a carry-on backpack. We slept in a tent, and we stayed in largely people's homes. We're experience-driven people, and we're hospitality people.
Welcome back to the Radical Hospitality Show. I'm your host, Zeke Freeman. Today we got a special guest, a guy that has gotten to be a friend and a consultant. Kind of along the way of our journey here, we've been able to have a number of these conversations as we've been building our road hotel. Bobby Mikulas is a few steps ahead and a real dynamic entrepreneur. He's the co-founder of Kinship Landing, which is a boutique hotel celebrating the redefinition of hospitality through community-centric and design-forward space. They're based in Colorado Springs. Bobby has earned a widespread recognition for his innovative approach of creating unique guest experiences. His accolades include being named Young Entrepreneur of the Year in 2022 and received the Colorado Springs Business Journal Rising Star Award. Kinship Landing was featured in the prestigious Condé Nast Travelers Awards Best New Hotel Hot List in 2021, further cementing Bobby's influence in the industry. In addition, Bobby's just a giving guy, spending time with other entrepreneurs, startups, and guys like ourselves that are trying to get things done. So, Bobby, appreciate all that you're giving to the industry and to us. Thanks for being on the Radical Hospitality Show.
Right on. Happy to be here.
Well, this is our second go at it, and I apologize. Last time I showed up and we did an in-person interview, and I had some technical difficulties. So you guys are getting the little bit more foolproof Riverside interview. We'll make sure to clip in some good shots of Kinship Landing, which is a really beautiful hotel in Colorado Springs that they put together. Bobby, do you mind just kind of backing up a little bit? And I know we've done this once, but just give us a little bit of the origin story of Bobby Mikulas and Kinship Landing, how you guys got that up and going.
Sure, no problem. One of the questions I get all the time is, what was your experience before this? Were you guys hotel people? So I grew up with a deep love and appreciation and enjoyment of hospitality, but I did not grow up in the industry per se. We grew up in a very hospitable home. We had people in our home every week, lots of them, and we had foreign exchange students with us and all that kind of stuff. But as far as industry hospitality, that wasn't really a part of my upbringing or my professional background the decade leading up to this project. So I was born and raised in Colorado Springs, and a more accurate theme or thread in my career would be like outdoor adventure and community development. Those were really two big pieces of who I am still to this day. So no, I don't have background in hospitality before this project, but of course we have a deep background in hospitality. When you think about taking care of people and welcoming the stranger and inviting people into authentic belonging, that's a big part of who we are. Kinship Landing is fun for me to talk about the story because the property, the brand, our expression of our values is informed by so many people, and I'm one of them. There's a bunch of people who informed who we are today, from our creative design and directors to architects to our community members, our founding team members and co-founders. So those are the people whose fingerprints are all over our property and our culture, and there's hundreds of them. I just happen to be one of them who got to kind of guide the ship a little bit. So before Kinship Landing, my wife and I had actually been traveling for about a year. We lived out of a carry-on backpack. We slept in a tent, and we stayed in largely people's homes or little homestays or bungalows that we could live in order to really get the pulse for what these community rhythms were like around the world across 17 different countries. We stayed in one hotel over 11 months. So we're not like hotel-centric people. We're experience-driven people, and we're hospitality people. And that trip was deeply inspiring to my wife and I. And one of the questions we asked is, how can we serve our community when we return home to Colorado Springs? And there was a clear need for a new kind of hospitality in downtown Colorado Springs. There was a clear need to welcome travelers with open arms and equip and empower them to recreate and enjoy our community in really sustainable and conscious ways. And there was a clear need to contribute to the thriving of our downtown by offering a really cool bar and cafe that brought in art and music and events and healthy, nutrient-dense food. So we kind of cooked all that stuff up in a business model. Towards the last half of our trip, we were living in a camper van that we bought in New Zealand and started hashing out a business plan and renderings and things like that. And we came back and hit the ground running in 2017, recruited a team of co-founders, and about 6 months later purchased a blighted piece of infill land right in downtown Colorado Springs. And the rest is kind of history. We designed our hotel with a team of professional creatives and built it with a contractor and ran it for the first couple years as owner operators, establishing culture. And now we're here 4 years later with a fully functioning 40-room boutique hotel, community bar and cafe, and some pretty cool rhythms of events and gatherings.
Man, I love that. I like where you started, not necessarily being a hotel guy. I think one of the things that is unique about Kinship and maybe the boutique space, some of them, is this real connection when you come in to not just being a place to come and stay, but more of like a launch pad or a base camp. I look at them, I'm seeing the flies up above, and I think there is something special, like when the founders, have a true love for hospitality and outdoors and adventure that, does seem to create that type of space that connects people to outdoors. How are you guys doing that at Kinship? And, what are some of the ways that you guys, seek to be more of that base camp, that launch pad, than just another bed to put your head down?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm hearing that language a lot more these days. These concepts are popping up, and it's not just hotels or hospitality concepts. It's other industries are talking about being a launch pad or a base camp or a hub. So we didn't hear that language wasn't like as prevalent 7 years ago when we were starting to do this. Airbnb was very popular back then, or starting to be very popular in many of the markets that we're interested in. And hotels were just starting to recognize consumers are wanting some more authenticity. They're wanting to be connected to the local scene, and they want to integrate into the culture of the places that they're visiting. So we just think about that as when we travel, it makes a difference when you've got a pal and you're going to maybe travel through Czech Republic, but you're going to meet your buddy and he's going to pick you up at the airport and get you started. You might have dinner the first night and talk about what trails are muddy and what trails are good and where the climbing is in the sun and where the climbing is in the shade and which restaurants to order sausage from and all the stuff that you can scour what used to be Lonely Planet, physical books. You can scour the books and the threads, and you can ask ChatGPT where the best food is. But at the end of the day, having an authentic local connection, meaning a trusted relationship, makes a huge difference in your experience when you're traveling. And so that's what we seek to be, is an authentic connection and a local experience. And in Colorado Springs, to answer your question, Zeke, adventure is just prevalent as a part of who we are as a community. We are right at the base of a 14,000-foot mountain. We've got caves and rocks and rivers, and outdoor adventure and outdoor recreation is a huge part of who we are. So we've got 5 core values at Kinship Landing. One of them is actually adventure. And so practically, how do we do that with our guests? It looks different. I can get into some of the nitty gritty if you'd like to go there, but that's a big part of how we think about offering hospitality to our guests, is being able to multiply the value of adventure and to hold their hand and introduce them to the next relationship or resource that's going to give them a chance to interact with adventure in our region. We don't have a lot of amenities. We don't have a climbing wall on the side of our building. We don't have a spa. And so we really like to showcase the hero of our story, which is our community, and say that, for you to have a great time, you need to get out of our doors and go out, experience the woods, experience the museums, experience the art and live music. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question directly, but
Yeah,
it's
I
we
love
can
that.
processes, but
And I loved you kind of tipped into your core values here. I know when you and your wife began to come up with this idea for Kinship Landing, you guys weren't alone. And so you brought in some other partners on this and then had to circle up to get that partnership together to actually create something that was authentic to you guys. So how did the core values play a part of that? How did you guys come together as a partnership to in the beginning of creating Kinship?
sure. Well, what's really fun about our partners, so we got five co-founders, my wife and I, plus three other folks who we call co-founders. So this is like the founding team that went from we should build a hospitality concept to, oh my gosh, we're breaking ground tomorrow. And honestly, we interviewed a bunch of folks and put them through some tests. And at the end of the day, two of those co-founders were people that we traveled with on that trip. We were in Iceland together for about a week or 10 days with Jason and his wife and Nate and his now wife. And when we traveled, we would invite friends, say, you got to come travel with us for a week or two. And those are two of the folks who took us up on it and really embodied that spirit of adventure. So Nate, Jason, and another fella named Lauren, who's has just been pivotal. That's our co-founding team. And really, it started with an invitation into an adventure. We're going to run down this idea with focus and commitment for a good run here. I remember Brooke and I saying, we're going to go all in on this thing for 2 years, and we'll lose every penny in the process. And if after 2 years it's not working, we'll talk about something different. But every wall we run into, if it's inside of that 2 years, we're going to dig under it, blow through it, whatever we need to do to get around these obstacles. We're giving it 2 full years. So the beginning of identifying our core team, our founding team, was an invitation into that adventure that was riddled with uncertainty and risk. And then, of course, the qualifications and experience that those guys brought. One of the very first activities that we did was to identify and sync up on our core values. So I could honestly talk about this for the rest of our time, Zeke. So just cut me off and, interrupt. But our five core values are like our compass. Every decision that we make, we first put on the lens of, does this align with our core values? And if the answer is yes, then we can start asking about price and locality and qualification. But we have five core values. They are courage, trust, community, generosity, and adventure. And that exercise of syncing up with our team was really important because we've never argued about those values. We've argued about all kinds of stuff as a team. And we've argued about what the definition and expression of those values looks like. But we've never argued that generosity is a lens that we want to hold when we make decisions, or that we want to make decisions that are full of courage. So that has just been so critical for us to have a true north to point to, and for everything to flow from that, because we interview people through those values. We look at vending relationships through those values. So I would say that was like step number one for us. And as kind of our CEO from the beginning, that was the first critical step, is to align on the backbone of our company, which is values that can be translated into so many different things. And so there's a
So
short.
if I'm a team and I'm looking to start up a new hospitality company, and I've got a group, practically, how did you guys do that? Did you just get down and whiteboard it? Did you pull out? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, if my memory serves me right, which I can guarantee it doesn't, it went something like this. Brooke and I proposed some initial stabs at values. Values are really important to us. This is how we're going to steer and guide the company we're building together. Here's a few values that we've put on our minds as ones that we think are important and are good, strong core values. And then we invited our team to think about that and bring some ideas to the table. So, we probably had a list of 6 or 12 core values. And I think we spent half a day together. And this is after dialogue and meeting and talking about it with a whiteboard in a room, coming up with what are the values that we can agree on up front. And so we ended up with these five core values that really are the foundation of culture, and the foundation of identity is your values and belief systems. And we actually took it one step further, and we attached a belief statement to each value so that we know what we mean when we say adventure. Everyone's mind goes to different things when you hear words. And so adventure for us just means pursuing experiences that cause us to grow. So the adventure of offering table service instead of counter service, that's a value. That's exemplifying our value. The adventure of figuring out managed parking solutions that's going to challenge us to grow, that's in line with our values. We also offer an adventure credit for our staff where they can get paid to go on an adventure and get reimbursed for their expenses. And they get to define adventure as anything that causes them to grow in a challenge. So those belief statements, I use adventure as an example. We've got belief statements for all five of our core values. It kind of helps us see, what do we mean when we say generosity? What do we mean when we say trust? And then when we train our staff and bring on any strategic partner, we spend a lot of time on our values, providing examples of what we don't mean by being generous. and examples of what we do mean by being generous. So, yeah, that was a critical exercise, and it's a great starting point for discussion when we're looking to kind of link up with anyone in any way.
All right. And then 2 years was kind of the time commitment to get it done, which is funny you say that. I had no idea it would take this long, but we started with a piece of property. We probably should have started with values, but I think we had some friends and some colleagues, and we went towards it, and we thought we'd be as professional architects in and through this in a year. So we're 2 years and we're getting to groundbreaking now. What is your 2 years from core values to groundbreaking or construction look like?
I'm hesitant to like answer that question honestly because it's going to make me look even more naive than I actually am. But we were just convinced when we started this company in 2017, summer of 2017, we were going to be open in 2018 or early 2019. We just knew that that was going to be the case. So obviously, we weren't even close. Our timeline, those initial 2 years, we got up to that 2 year, and the answer was not, we did it. It was, we're going to keep going. So,
Or too far to turn around?
yeah, too far to turn around. However you want to slice it. For us, it was, we're going to make this work. We're going to keep going. But, we kind of did that 2 years like, we've got gas in the tank. There's no exits for 2 years. So let's go. And, 2 years was in a lot of ways like the starting point when we got to that. I don't think we broke ground until, right about that time, I guess. About 2 years in is when we broke ground.
Yeah. So you guys, practical standpoints, located a property, raised capital, found lending. It was all like super smooth and easy and went together like clockwork along just those paths. And
That's it. You nailed it.
yeah,
Pretty much just easy. No, I mean, you missed a really critical step there, Zeke, which I know you maybe did on purpose or just kind of making a joke, but before buying the land, before looking for capital, we had to build a model that we thought worked on paper. And all those other steps are dependent on that model. So that model was a 3 to 6 month process of, you got your pro forma. Okay, great. How do you know that that occupancy projection on that day, on that month, and that year is justifiable outside of your gut feeling? And so gathering the data and interpreting the data and running it by CPAs and other hotel owners, that was a big step number one is let's build a model. So we've got a plan that we think works. If we do these things and input this cash and offer this service, the outputs are going to be these things. So that was step number one, build a model. Pretty quickly after that, we bought the land. And that was our first stake in the ground. We purchased a piece of land. We raised some quick money by some strange miracle. It was like one of our first big indications that there's something else pushing this project here. I don't know if it was a strange tide of good fortune or some other mysterious guiding force that was helping us along the way. But purchasing the land is a wonderful story that I could get into. But that was our first stake in the ground. Like, we're here, we're downtown, we're property owners, and we're doing something. And that also gave us collateral. So now we have legitimate collateral besides all of the HELOCs that we've taken out on our homes. We've got legitimate collateral that we can leverage when we go and grow this company. So built the model, purchased the land, beginning spending our seed money, our own personal invested money on soft costs like architectural drawings. And once we had those to a place where we could go to bid with contractors, then we started raising money. So we didn't start raising private equity, not even private equity, I mean venture friends and family equity until we had a model, some collateral, and some really good paces down the road on what it would take to bring the hotel out of the ground. So we took a lot of that risk up front with our own capital before we invited other people into that journey.
did you guys use loans to purchase the land, or did you guys personal capital on HELOCs?
Yeah, personal capital. So we more or less bought the land and funded soft costs with personal capital and one very generous high risk private loan. We identified an entity that was willing to take a risk on us. And honestly, at the end of the day, they believed in us as founders and our vision, and they had a nice piece of collateral in the land. So by the time you layer on that entity loan, if things went really bad, we're the ones losing money. The collateral was backed against the land there. And so identifying the land was a big piece of the beginning there, because you can go and find money if you've got something that's of value, and land has got value. You've got to supersede your first right on that land if you're going to layer debt onto it. So all of our capital kind of put into a second position.
And then what did construction look like for you guys? Who'd you guys end up working with on the build, and what kind of costs were per square foot were on your build and that sort
Yeah.
of thing?
Yeah, that was super fun. We worked with a local contractor who had never built a hotel before. They do a lot of really good work still to this day. And we worked with a local architect who'd never built a hotel before, who does a lot of good work still to this day. And so we built this really local team, and we went to bid and interviewed a bunch of folks, but ended up with a local team that was like us, doing something new, embarking on an adventure of designing and building a hotel. Value engineering is kind of like a word or a phrase you never want to use if you don't have to. But as we got under construction, we slowly learned, okay, these numbers are not quite as tight as we thought they were. And this is just like a word of advice that anyone with experience would know, but I'm never going to take drawings to bid unless they're 100% CDs. So those drawings need to be 100% done and approved by the city before you go bid them for real. You're going to want to get a pulse before, but the difference between 95% CDs and 100% CDs for us was about 40% of the project cost.
Mm.
So, we learned that despite the multiple rounds of bidding we did, there was room for contractors to kind of say, your price is about to go up. So that was a big
Great.
snafu. We broke ground and then learned that we had to restack some capital and value engineer the project a little bit.
Did a lot of that fall like the FF&E category, or was it across the board, architecture, envelope, and
Pretty
MEPs?
across the board, Zeke. We got creative. Let's just put it that way. You're right to identify FF&E. That's something that we just didn't have a lot of excess cash for by the time things were all said and done. So some of our FF&E, like, we could have been a little bit more generous in our spend on that. But we also found all kinds of little things that we might have. So here's a great example. We have one egress stairwell. 4 stories of stairs. You got to have it in the case of a fire and the elevator's not working. And that was drawn as steel pans with concrete. So you build these steel stairwell and you fill them with concrete. Pretty standard. You see that in most egress. We kind of looked at that and said, that looks pretty expensive. And it was actually Nate, our partner and founder, who was overseeing the construction at the time. Like, what if we built those out of wood? Anything against building stairs out of wood? So we have these beautiful white oak stairs in our stairwell that are gorgeous, and it saved us about 50 grand. So we combed through every inch of the building and found that stuff and ended up with some cool innovations along the way, but some of them not so cool.
What would be some of the lessons learned, coming out of construction that you would do different next time?
Bid on 100% CDs. So I said that. My basic sort of like advice for folks who come to me and are embarking on something creative and big like this, that they maybe never have done it before, that's describing me 5 years ago, is, all right, here's what I want you to do. Take your budget, let's call it $2 million. You're going to build a $2 million Airbnb. Take your budget and take your timeline. Let's call it 1 year. Shave a little bit off that, and that's the number you use when you talk to your contractors and your architect. Okay, we got $1 million build, and it's going to take us a year to do it. And then internally, take your model that you've built, your pro forma, and go ahead and just double both those numbers. Double your budget, double your timeline, and make sure that you can handle that model financially and time wise. Because here's what's going to happen if you do that, and that's crazy. People told us something like that. And we're like, oh, we have owner contingency that's double industry standard, and our GC is holding the contingency, and our timeline is generous because we're accounting for weather days. We're doing all that. Well, ours ended up being about double the cost and double the timeline. And I've heard this story repeated many, many times, especially projects below $10 million. So what happens though, if you do that, is at the end of the day, stuff hits the fan and you either can keep doing the project or you have excess time and money. They're both good situations. If you don't do that exercise, you either are going to squeak by or you got to kill the project.
Yeah.
So that's like
Yeah,
the big one, just take it and double it.
it's pretty much the same advice. I grew up with a builder, and that was kind of what my dad would always tell me. It's double the cost, double the time, and that's often, unfortunately, can be true. It certainly doesn't work out on paper when you're trying to get a bank loan under RIT or raise capital for something. So as that happens, and I've seen a lot of construction projects go over cost, and the market's made up for it, especially on the residential side where we had increase in sales costs kind of just happening for the last 10 years. On hospitality, it's different. Like you got to come out and you got to be able to carry that loan and make money on it. So I don't know how much that is tongue in cheek or realistic, or would there be a tighter budget number that you would actually look at? Like what are your thoughts there, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, you're not actually going to double it, right? You can't hold multiple millions of dollars in savings just in case you need it. And
Yeah.
some people can. And honestly, a lot of people who build boutique hotels are the kind of people who can do that. However, that was not our story. So yeah, you're not actually going to double it, but I would say just take that model and scrub that thing. And if, as an example, if you got 5 bids from contractors and 2 of them are on the high end, 2 of them on the low end, one's right in the middle, the high end's probably telling a truer story of what could happen. Maybe you still go with low bid, but your model needs to anticipate what the other guys told you about what could be true.
Yeah. Yeah. And have that stretchability.
Yeah.
So when if it does go in and go over during construction, what are some of the options to go out and get additional capital or work with the bank to stretch a loan? What does that look like if a project begins to stretch during construction?
Yeah, I don't wish that on anyone. And I would say even like planning for that is maybe just plan to do it right from the front. I can tell you how we did it, but it was not fun. It was not easy, and we were extended a lot of generosity and grace. So not everyone gets that lucky like we did, but I can only tell our story. I mean, basically what that did for us is it threw us into a tailspin. Our bank dropped us at that point. So our contractor said, "Hey, you're over budget by this amount, and this contract I have for you doesn't work because we need to adjust the numbers." And that contract was necessary for our bank to fund a loan that we'd already closed. So about 30 days later, our bank dropped us and said, sorry, it's not going to work. And we had to spend the next 8 months from groundbreaking, 8 months to find another permanent bank construction loan to finance the project. And of course, the project had grown in scope at that point, so it was a bigger number. And at the end of the day, this is where the soul searching had to happen. We had to look at ourselves as founders and say, how bad do we want to do this? Because if we want to do this, we need to go find some more money. And if we're going to find some more money, where's that going to come from? What are we going to raise against? And so ultimately, we ended up pushing our equity back out there into the world without diluting our existing investors, and functionally diluted the founders only, and going and finding more equity. So we brought additional equity to the table that grew the bank loan a little bit. The model fortunately still penciled at a cost increase there. And so that's how we did it, but that was a real challenge. We actually ended up converting some note holders to equity holders in the process who were excited about the long-term vision, and we ended up offering an off ramp to some folks who had been on, and they weren't really along for the ride. If the project was going to increase and the timeline was going to increase, it wasn't the right portfolio decision for them. So we gave them an off ramp, and we had to replace those with new guys. So that was 8 months of hard work.
Man. So one of the advice and one of the hard areas to kind of juggle is in contractor land is most contractors, well, a lot of contractors prefer a cost plus, that just has this kind of flexibility of, here's our fee and, we're going to charge you what we're going to charge you, based on our subcontractor cost. Maybe it's got a bid in there versus a guaranteed maximum price or GMP. Or if they'll do a GMP, they pretty much give the advice that, hey, this is going to cost more because we have to guarantee more and it's going to push up the overall budget. SBA, what I'm finding right now, wants some sort of that like cap of, it could be a cost plus with a not to exceed, up here at some point. This has been something that like I'm always kind of negotiating with on different projects, especially on red. What's your thought on any of these, like how to deal with the contractor when maybe you're at, maybe you had to bid it at 95%. And so it's got to be a, cost plus. What are your thoughts on handling contractors and contracts to kind of secure some of that so you don't end up with these big overruns?
Yeah, it's a tricky conversation, Zeke, because you're asking about strategy a little bit here, and strategy varies project to project and person to person. Our strategic moves, we try to align with our values, and it's easy to be tempted otherwise because there are a lot of strategies out there in the world that don't align with how we understand generosity. There are a lot of strategies out there in the world that are effective strategies that don't align with our value of trust. And when we say trust, we just mean we believe people are inherently good. When we say generosity, we mean that we know that there's enough to go around, so we look for ways to share it. So we actually deployed a strategy that ended up biting us in the butt because everything is human. Humans are emotional creatures, and at the end of the day, you're working with people. So we had something like a GMP contract, and in order to incentivize timeline, we introduced the idea of liquidated damages to our contractor, which means every day they're late, they pay us money. And it was really kind of spooky to them, and it sort of threw them off guard because it was in contrast to the way we'd been operating before. And what we ended up doing was backing out of that advice, which we paid great money for that advice. And we slowed down and said, what are our values? Our values are trust. Our values are generosity, courage, adventure, community. So let's lean into those. And what we ended up doing was landing on a GMP contract, and we incentivized them to come in below that. And rather than taking on margin, we said, look, let's do a GMP and we'll split the savings just like that. We had some other language in there that, we really didn't want them to, they would rather just do the JMP and get all the savings, right? So we worked with them to say, let's figure out a win-win here where we're all motivated on timeline, we're all motivated on cost. And so we offered some nice incentives on the back end if they were willing to move quickly and stay on budget. And so we leaned into our values, and that's how we backed into that strategy. I'd say just practically universally, Zeke, some sort of incentive for the contractor that uh, is not in their control is a good thing. So like an incentive is only real if it's not there, if they don't hit their marks. So GMP contract doesn't really incentivize them to come in under budget because they're going to get it anyway, one way or another. One of the greatest ways to incentivize contractors is to consider inviting them to join the cap table. They start to look at this property a little bit differently when they're like, that's my hotel. I think we better square up those metaphors a little bit, and we better grade that a little bit more to whatever the details are. So incentivizing a
Yeah, I like that.
contractor to have ownership of the project in some form is something that I'm a big fan of.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, all right. So you got through the business of finding and developing, and then you get through the business of construction, and then you had to create another business of actually operating a hotel. I know you looked through a different models. What does that journey look like? What did you guys do in the beginning? What are you doing now? What's your advice on hotel operations?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We really looked at partnering with professionals up front. We knew that we'd never done this professionally on a very small scale. We had that's a different tangent I can go on why we made those decisions, but we decided that culture was so important to us, and our brand expression, our authentic brand expression was so important. It was how we were going to differentiate in a soon to be saturated market. So we actually held all the operations in-house, and my wife opened the hotel. She's one of our 5 founders. She was our general manager. I was our sales and marketing director. We were boots on the ground at the hotel 20 hours a day, really establishing the culture there. And I would say pros and cons of that. For the pros for us is we had a little bit more control of what was coming out of the property every day from a guest experience perspective. We had the authority to kind of course correct. The cons were we'd never done it before. So I would say, to answer your question on advice side, if you're going to try and do it yourself in some form, I would layer as many professional resources onto that do it yourself as you can. Some examples is rather than doing our own revenue management, we worked with a revenue management partner and kind of learned that world in partnership with a paid revenue manager. Same thing on technology and software and managed services. We worked with an MSP, a managed service provider, to look at all the technology on our property. So if you're going to do it yourself, I would say maybe just bite off the chunks that you can handle and be okay with paying some money to learn until you think you can handle it. On the other side of things, there's massive benefit of just working with the pros. And there are people out there who offer management services for hotels. They don't have to be an owner, they don't have to be an investor, they don't have to own the land or the brand. They'll come in and manage your hotel for you. This is very common. Of course, you know this. It's a bit of give and take though. You're going to let go a little bit of control. And so, but they're good at what they do. That's why they're in business as management companies. And there's a lot of benefit there because depending on your strategy and what you want to do and what you're hoping for this out of an owner or a developer, that allows you to be kind of in your chair. So I'd say when you're asking that question is I would just ask, what do you bring to the table and how can we leverage that? Our CFO from the beginning said, you don't want me running operations. It's not a good thing. So we took him at his word and said, okay, let's figure out how to build our operations team so that you can stay in what you're good at. And I think a lot of times, people get sucked into operations because either they're good at it or they like it or it's easy or comfortable or it's important to them. But just because those things are true, it doesn't mean that's the highest and best use of your time and energy. So really asking the question, what's the highest and best use? What can I do that no one else can do that also needs to get done? Those are good questions to ask when you're thinking about operations.
So let's look at the DIY model versus bringing in an outside consultant. What would be kind of the key roles in a build your hospitality management company versus I bring in an outside company? What would still be the key roles of hotel owner, asset manager? How would you see those differentiating?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it depends on the property, right? If you have food and beverage, um, that's a different story. If your facility has a pool and other amenities, that's a different story. Do you do catering and banquets? Maybe that's a whole department in and of itself. But as far as the do-it-yourself model, it really is going to be dependent on the asset and the property and what your goals are. Another example, if you're really high on the hospitality side of things, you're probably not going to get away as easily with the Airbnb model, which is like, here's your check-in code, text us if you need us. If that human touch is really important to you, you might have to staff up a little bit. So it just depends on your model. What does your model tell you? But given that comment, it all starts with your general manager or your leadership team and identifying what do you need out of your leader and then flowing it down from there. Ideally, you're building a position, not building a position around a person who's really good at a couple things and then you build a position around them. We kind of learned that the hard way because we built positions around people that we knew we just had to add. And turns out later, like they really also need to be good at accounting. If they're going to be in that role, they also need to be good at accounting. But instead, we got two people doing that, or it could be one. So we've learned a lot about making sure that the position is well understood and then we find the right person for the position. That just comes, I think, from time and experience. So for us, it's a general manager. You got housekeeping and rooms, that's a department. You got food and beverage, that's a department. You got HR, payroll, accounting, that's maybe a department. And then you got facilities and maintenance and asset management. So those are like four right off the bat that I would say you need to consider. And there does need to be some unified leadership of those departments, whether that's a general manager or an asset manager or a management company. That's a good place to start. But you can break that down then with banquets, front of house, back of house. That's just on the food and beverage side. You can go 100 different places depending on the scale of your project.
Yeah. Um, so for
I mean, I'm curious, Zeke, I don't want to derail too much, but
yeah,
you guys are thinking through this right now. So your property is a little smaller. How do you think about the org structure or the org chart for that property?
yeah, and I mean, we've kind of set up where we have a general management team, and we would be doing the asset management of the property, but we really want and we're putting in place a good partner that's going to be a property manager. Out of that property manager, is going to be hiring a general manager. It will have a staff team. It'll have a housekeeping cleaning team. And I think we're defining like our roles. Like right now, we're kind of in the middle of construction, and so we're focused on that. And as it rolls into actual operations, we're in that process, I think, of dividing out like who's really watching over, the front of house and the guest experience, and who's really watching over the back of house numbers and financials. Uh, and we have that, some internally that we can divide up. We also have a CFO that's really doing the books and, um, CPA type work. But we're in this process of like every step along the way, we're kind of putting that together. I think for us, it's been a process to get to a point where we have at least some guiding experience with a good property manager that can direct that. But I think what the continued advice I've got is don't just hand it over and expect it to work. Make sure that what you're doing as an ownership team is still engaged and involved, maybe not overriding, but keeping a close eye on all the pieces that have to go. At this point, we're in the place of still kind of self-education and learning and talking to you guys to make sure, and other operators to make sure we're going to do that correctly. So
Got it.
that's our
Just as you're
place.
talking, I would just ask or hope that anyone like you and your team has got some grip on what unique value you're adding. And that's just the heart of the founder, right? What's the heartbeat of the founder coming out in this product that's unique in the world? And that's like a strategic kind of fork in the road. Are you offering something kind of different and unique, or are you offering what I would call a commodity because there's demand for lodging? And you can get away with a lot less involvement if rooms are going to sell. There's one truck stop in town and we got 100 truckers. And so we've got this one hotel and that's going to absorb. Doesn't matter how good or bad you do it, people need a place to sleep. That's different than we're going to compete in a market by doing something a little different. And if you are going to be doing something a little different, that's where as owners, founders, you really got to be committed to that path and that strategy. And that's what you're going to fight your battles over if you do hire out is your own version of expressing something unique in the world. And we kind of know what that is for us. And so that's where we pick our fights is no, we're going to do it different because we are different.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. And I think that's a good place to start. Uh, when you bring in an expert, sometimes they're bringing in a preconceived notion of, here's what works. And, I think as guests, people are looking for more of that, unique experience that maybe is not, always found in, a Hilton or the same type of experience. And that's kind of what it's kind of been created in the Airbnb when, you individuals can show up and, this is their, unique, maybe it's their farm or a place to stay or something that
Yeah.
they love. We kind of share values of outdoor adventure and climbing and, trail running and skiing and all of that. I mean, those are the pieces that, we've really fought to kind of bring into the hotel so that when guests come in and stay, they have a connection to what we love about our area. As it evolves into actual running and management, it's something that I think will be a forefront. It won't be a disalignment, I hope, with our property managers, but it'll be a hey, this is an area that I think it's got to get pulled through.
Yeah, it's tricky stuff.
Yeah, tricky stuff. So, what else are you up to these days? What's kind of next with Kinship Landing and your other companies that you have with consulting? What's next in your world?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I love this question because I can just talk about our vision. So our vision is to have a network of concepts that surrounds the globe that are cherished by and contribute to local communities and their thriving. So that's what we're looking to do over the next 5 to 100 years. Maybe I'll see it. Maybe I'll be the one to lead us there. Maybe we'll change that vision into something different. But right now, that's our vision. And so I'm on the look for where's our next property. And that might find us in 10 years. I hope it finds us a lot sooner. We're doing some things right in Colorado Springs. And so we're to a point where we're comfortable starting to ask the question, can we do this again in another place? So that's something that's on the horizon. Our focus is absolutely in Colorado Springs right now. And we are talking about maybe some creative capital improvement projects that could be a lot of fun down the road that will shake things up a little bit in Colorado Springs. So that's a little bit on the kinship side. We are always harping on doubling down on hospitality and culture. So that's always a focus for us with refreshing trainings and staff benefit and that kind of thing. So that's kind of on the kinship side, is how do we grow our offerings in Colorado Springs, and how do we just have an ear to the ground with where is the right community for us to serve in the way that we've served here in Colorado Springs. Apart from that, my wife and I run a small little side hustle called Sonderwin, and that's been fun the last year. We give so little of our time and energy to this, but every now and then it's right to journey alongside with someone. And so I get the privilege of walking with founders and leaders of entrepreneurial projects when they've got big decisions to make and they need help making those decisions, or even building a framework for those decisions. And if those decisions lead them to a big, bold action, I love to walk with them, forming a strategy and executing that strategy. So I do some consulting on the side. And we also offer some experiences, often based out of Kinship Landing through our consulting company, to help people kind of think and live courageously. So those are where really my two professional energy outputs go, and almost all of it is with Kinship. It's really just when the stars align that we decide to walk with another entity for a season or host a really cool event that we think is going to multiply good in the world.
What are some of the people that you work with and some of the events that you hold?
Sure. We're going to be holding a parenting summit coming up in September or October. So we have three young boys. It's near and dear to our hearts, and we want to learn how to parent with intention and courage. So we're going to host a summit so we can learn, and we're going to invite some other people to come learn. So that's coming up in October. My wife does all kinds of fun events. She just did a just in case workshop to think about how to prepare for the future. And that's relevant to us for some personal reasons. We do adventure trips, so it, like, you see these themes of our values kind of weaving their way into both businesses here. But we love taking people out on adventures and using that as an awakening opportunity to awaken a life well lived and to think differently about problems you might be trying to solve. So we'll use the outdoors and community as a way to reframe reality a little bit for folks. But yeah, the big ones for us are that parenting summit coming up, and then some of the projects that we've worked on. We'll work with founders who are starting retail shops, all the way to real estate developers who are looking to put together site plans and need that community component or that team building component for their development project. So it's kind of a broad array of stuff. I wish I was a little more focused, but honestly, most of our focus is on growing Kinship Landing.
Oh, that's great stuff. And if someone was interested in learning more about coming out to Kinship or this parenting summit or some of the other offerings that you guys have, where would be the best place for them to connect
Sure.
and learn?
Thanks for asking, man. Good questions. Kinshiplanding.com is where you can learn more about Kinship. Every first Friday of the month, we throw a big party. We've got live music, great food, a local artist. So that's a good way to kind of rub shoulders with friends and family every first Friday of the month in the evening at Kinship Landing. We've got a whole bunch of events you can find on our website. And then sonderwin.com is where you can learn about that other little side hustle. And we're on Instagram on both of those. So would love to see some of y'all who are listening here at Homa Bar and Cafe on our main level or at the hotel, and help you host an event and have a good time, make some memories.
Love it. Love it. Well, if you get a chance, go check out Kinship Landing. It's a really amazing space. Thank you so much, Bobby, for your time, generosity, and living adventurously.
Yeah, thank you for listening. That feels good to be heard every now and then. So thanks for letting me do the talking today, and appreciate the project you're pulling out of the ground. I'm excited for what that's going to offer to Colorado. I mean, that's a good thing. So thank you.